Hey everybody, welcome to tonight's presentation with Judge Jim Gray. I wanted to point out to everybody that please have your video turned off and remain muted. If you have questions during the presentation, put them into the group chat and we will make sure that Judge Gray gets them. It's important to do that though and not send them directly to him, because if 5 different people have the same question, we're going to filter those down to just one time so that he doesn't have to sift through a bunch of questions. So tonight I have the leader of the HB Liberty Club, George Reis, and he's going to introduce Judge Gray.
Okay, thanks, Mike. And also I want to thank Mike and Torya both for being our technical people tonight and for this entire series. So thank you guys very much for that. Also, David Naranjo is on. David Naranjo is the chair of the Libertarian Party of Orange County. So if anyone has any questions or anything and you get a chance to send a private chat to David, you can do so during the course of the evening tonight. So a few weeks ago, I had this idea that it would be fun to have a presentation on basic libertarian principles that could be presented to those of us in Orange County, the Libertarian Party of Orange County, and to the Huntington Beach Liberty Club. And I approached Judge Gray with it, and I said, Jim, can you make a presentation for us on this thing? And not only did he say yes, but he said yes, and let's make it a series. So we have 5 Tuesdays in a row, tonight and the next 4 upcoming Tuesday nights. All of you have received emails and information about what each of those presentations are going to be. So I think this is a phenomenal opportunity. It's something that Jim just said to me, our country needs, and I said our country desperately needs. So the time is right for us, and hopefully this is going to be some good information for some of you, maybe for the first time. For others of you, things that you can share with others who maybe share our values but don't know enough about the Libertarian Party itself. A quick introduction to Judge Gray. He served on Superior Court in Orange County from 1989 to 2009. He was awarded in 1992 the Judge of the Year by the Business Litigation section of the Orange County Bar Association. But then in 1995, he was awarded Judge of the Year by the Orange County Constitutional Rights Foundation. And now that award is actually named for Judge Gray. In 2012, he was a Libertarian candidate for Vice President of the United States. He is the author of several books. Some of them are Why Our Drug Laws Have Failed and What We Can Do About It, 2 Paragraphs for Liberty, A Voter's Handbook, Effective Solutions to America's Problems. He has a weekly podcast, All Rise, The Libertarian Way with Judge Gray. It kind of rhymes. and he's also written a musical. So he's the Renaissance man of the Libertarian Party. I'm proud to call him a friend. And tonight, thank you very much for making this presentation for us, Judge Gray.
Well, George, and thank you. It's just nice to share thoughts with good people. And yes, when George gave that as an opportunity, I jumped at it because I am a libertarian. And I think most people in our country are. I will go so far as to say that I believe that the Libertarian Party is the only party in the mainstream of American political thought today. That we do not want to profit by being involved in government. Yes, of course, we need government, but it should be much more limited, much less intrusive, much less expensive. But let me just introduce myself a little bit. George hit some there too, but just so you know from whom the information comes, because we're going to talk for tonight as well as the next 4 Tuesdays, all the Tuesdays in September, about libertarian approaches. And tonight will be the first, and that'll basically just be an introduction, libertarian thoughts, approaches, values. Then next Tuesday, we'll talk about the school choice. There are too many schools failing our children in our country today, which is needless, and it's an unnecessary tragedy. The 3rd Tuesday, then we'll talk about going to war, Veterans Administration, that sort of thing. Libertarians have definite savior instincts with regard to that. We're the only people really that represent the military and their families, and we'll go into that rather extensively. Then on the 4th Tuesday, it'll be healthcare, the rest. The theme of this will be, I'll ask you right now, because I would ask you to ask me questions. I'm going to ask you one right now. Can you think of any time in which the government got involved in the market, in which prices did not go up and quality of the goods and services did not go down? And I would venture to say that that's certainly true with regard to healthcare, education, and pretty much anything else that you can think of. And then the last one will be with regard to the free market as opposed to entitlements. We'll talk about these various general things. So I asked you a question throughout this opportunity, just like Michael said, and Michael, thank you for your involvement. David, thank you for your involvement as well in hosting. But if you do have questions, I recently was involved in seeking the nomination for the Libertarian Party for president in this year's election. Jo Jorgensen won the nomination, and I support her completely. But in doing that, I submitted myself numbers of times in different states to what they call AMAs. What does AMA mean? And it means ask me anything. And that's what we'll be doing tonight and for the next 4 Tuesdays. So feel free to ask me anything. Probably try to stay within the topic, but I appreciate honest questions, and I'll give you whatever honest answer that I can. By the way, I don't think that Mr. Trump nor Mr. Biden will submit to any AMA throughout this election. It's all pre-screened and that sort of thing. But at any rate, so yes, I was a lifelong Republican until the passage of the so-called Patriot Act back in 2001. I saw this then and see it now as a direct frontal assault on our civil liberties. And I still remember the process. It took me about 13 seconds to decide I really am a libertarian and will be for life. Prior to that, after graduating from UCLA, I was in the Peace Corps. I say that because I care about people. I want the best for people. Thereafter, after that, I went into USC Law School, was being drafted almost immediately. This was 1968. Was the height of the Vietnam War. So within a week of getting home from Costa Rica, I received my 1A classification and a notice for a physical. So I ended up joining the Naval ROTC at USC Law School so that I could get my education, and I went into the Navy. The summer before that, I went on to a training cruise, but even in May of the year 1970, I led a peace campus of USC to the steps of City Hall in Los Angeles, where we sent 20,000 letters to President Nixon demanding that he withdraw our troops that were illegally there in Cambodia. And so we sent those out. Within about a month and a half, I was in the rivers of Vietnam on a training cruise on the USS Meeker County. I was awarded a combat action ribbon and a Vietnam service ribbon. So at this point, then I was in the Navy. I was a federal prosecutor thereafter, prosecuted drug cases, among other things. Actually held the record for the largest drug prosecution in the Central District of California, the Middle Counties, back in 1974, I guess it was 75, 75 kilos of cocaine, of heroin, 165 pounds, something like that, was and is a lot of cocaine or heroin. But do you know what the record is today? Well, it's something on the order of 17 tons of cocaine in one place. So, but I was raised pretty much the same way that all of you were, to equate heroin, for example, with bad, with evil, with prison. And I just didn't think much about it, but I guess I was a drug warrior. But in 1992, after I'd been on the bench for 8 or 9 years, I did something enormously unusual for a sitting trial court judge, and that is I held a press conference. Judges don't do that, but I told anyone that would listen that our nation's drug policy, drug prohibition, had failed us, and we had to come up with a better approach. And I've been talking about this ever since. So I look back on that, that was a very libertarian thing to do. Tell the truth as best you can, put it out there, and openly discuss it. AMA, and that's what we did. So then I became a libertarian. And then I ran for U.S. Senate in 2004. Actually was sponsored, it was endorsed by the Long Beach Press Telegram. So it's always been one of my favorite periodicals, but I ran for U.S. Senate here in California in 2004. And then, as George said, ran as your vice presidential nomination in 2012 with Governor Gary Johnson. So that is my background. What is a libertarian? And I can tell you openly, and again, please feel free to ask questions, whatever, but I believe that we as a party have made an enormous mistake over the last number of decades, and that is that we have allowed other people to label us. Ayn Rand, of course, is probably the most famous with greed is good. Well, okay, that's fine for selling her novels, and she was right. She meant to say, and did, that if you act in your own economic self-interest, everybody prospers. You know, you can, it's kind of like that essay, which is wonderful, I, Pencil, where all of these people that don't know each other contribute to the final product of this pencil. They're acting in their own economic self-interest, logically. But we have been known as being greedy. We have been known as advocating no government whatsoever. Everybody uses drugs, you know, that sort of thing. And if you were to put a net over arbitrarily 100 people in a supermarket, that's probably pretty much the connotation that we would have. It's simply not true. I was in the Peace Corps. I care about people. Libertarians care about people. So what would be a libertarian? I quote this a lot. Thomas Jefferson, probably the prototype of a libertarian, said the following, and I use this and I recommend you do as well. I don't care if you worship one God, 20 gods, or no God. It doesn't pick my pocket and it doesn't break my leg. That's what Thomas Jefferson said, prototypical libertarian. Live and let live. Hey, isn't that a pretty good idea? And then you go back to the drug issue, for example, and I say to people, it makes as much sense to me to put this gifted actor Robert Downey Jr. in jail for his heroin problem, and he's had a pretty much lifelong craving, a lifelong problem with heroin. There's my dog, by the way, my little golden retriever. So if I reach down and scratch, that's what I'm doing. But it makes as much sense to me to put this Robert Downey Jr. in jail for his heroin problem as it would have Betty Ford in jail for her alcohol problem. It's the same thing, isn't it? It's a medical issue. Bring these people closer to medical professionals that can help them instead of rendering them automatic criminals and pushing them farther away. But if Robert Downey Jr., Betty Ford, you or I drive a motor vehicle while impaired by, you name it, methamphetamines, alcohol, that's my drug of choice, marijuana, whatever, that's a crime. Think of this. What's the difference? Critically important distinction. If I drive a motor vehicle impaired by one of these mind-altering, sometimes addicting substances, now I'm putting your safety at risk. That's a legitimate criminal justice issue. And libertarians cite these things all the time. That means we don't have a victimless crime. We potentially have a victim crime, and that is a different thing. The justice system was designed for and is pretty effective at protecting us from each other. That's what it's designed for, and it's pretty good at it. But it's not designed for, and it's woefully ineffective at protecting us from ourselves. And when I think about it in my libertarian way, and I hope that you do the same way, it makes as much sense to me for the government to control what I as an adult put into my body as it does what I put into my mind. It's none of their business. And you or I could go home tonight, or maybe we are home now, I guess it's Tuesday evening, but we could drink 10 martinis if we wanted to. We're an adult. Not a smart thing to do. Medically, that's a harmful thing to do, but it's not a violation of law, nor should it be. So live and let live. Allow each adult to live his, her life as he or she would desire, as long as that does not wrongly impede the possibility of other adults to do the same thing. Live and let live. So that's a primary part of what it is to be libertarian. And I'll bet you and your neighbors and your next door neighbors and all feel the same way. Feel the same way, as well you should. Other things. Don't tread on me. Don't tread on anybody. We do not believe in the use of force. For self-defense, of course. You know, somebody attacks the United States of America, I assure you, under a libertarian, they'll wish they had not. But otherwise, don't initiate force against others. Responsibility of all things. Responsibility personally, we take personal responsibility for our actions. Clubs, groups, corporations, and government. Do we have responsibility in government today? And I'll vouch to you that we do not. So let's talk about something on all of our minds right now. And again, if you have questions, feel free. I don't see any coming in yet, but we have still some time to go. This COVID-19 virus issue. What would a libertarian government have done with regard to this entire issue.
Excuse me, Judge Gray.
Yes.
There are some questions in your chat.
Okay, good. All roads are private. Okay, well, we'll get there, and thank you, and I will look at them. But I'm on a roll here, so I'm going to keep talking COVID-19 for a minute. First of all, the federal government and state governments were caught flat-footed. It is their obligation, and it would have happened in the libertarian government, it is their obligation to plan for emergencies. Now, no, they don't know where, when, what. It could have been an earthquake. It could have been one of these forest fires. It certainly could have been a pandemic like this. But they were caught flat-footed, and if it happens without your planning, it's too late to plan. So we were caught flat-footed, and it really cost us. And then the government showed, basically, it got in the way. The CDC prohibited people from being able to test, from being able to have ventilators. Some companies wanted to switch and manufacture ventilators. No, you can't do that. You don't have a permit, sort of thing. Finally, the federal government reached in and they made a expedited program for that, which just shows that it should have been that way to begin with. And then, really importantly, pretty much all mayors that we have seen, all governors that we have seen, have put politics ahead of sense and reality. I'm going to do everything I can to keep you from getting this virus. That means, of course, we're going to close down hundreds of thousands of businesses. We're going to lose millions, tens of millions of jobs, but that's okay. As Cuomo said in New York, if we save one life, then it will be worth it. No, it isn't. There are harms with regard to losing jobs, losing the economy. So what would a libertarian have done as a mayor, as a governor, as a president? Put out honest information into the marketplace. Tell people, we recommend that you wear masks. We recommend that you socially distance. We recommend, whatever these things are. And we'll try to test and the rest. Put out honest information. And then allow us as adults to make decisions, to weigh things one way or the other. You do not have governments trying to run an economy. It doesn't work. Ask the Soviet Union. Ask East Germany as opposed to West Germany. It just doesn't work. So what you do instead, what we saw is, no, they didn't have the economy as a part of the equation. But politically, oh, I did everything I could. So if you don't get the virus, I'm a hero. I was successful. Hooray for me. And if you do get the virus, well, you can't blame me. I did everything I could. But the economy was not a part of the equation, and that is damnable. We are causing real huge problems with regard to suicides, with regard to loss of businesses. Now, of course, the government is intruding with regard to the difference between a landlord, a relationship between a landlord and the tenant. No. I was the chairman of the World Affairs Council of Orange County when this virus first came, just early last February. And we had our lease that was due. So I contacted the landlord and said, look, what we do is put on events. We make our money by having people come in and they talk about world events, world affairs, and that's how we make our money. We're prohibited from doing that. We're not going to be making any money. So, but we don't want to move out. We'd have to store our furniture. We'd like to still have a base of operations, but we cannot afford this $2,308 a month rent that we've been paying you. So we will offer to pay you $1,000 a month. We have that in our savings and for 8 months. And then we will negotiate once we can have a little more information 8 months from now. The landlord made a decision. I'd rather have 40% of something than 100% of nothing. So the landlord said, sure. So we share the grief. We share the pain. But particularly the government of California reaches in and stops having any form of evictions. They don't have the right to do that. That was absolutely unauthorized by law, but they stepped in and did that. And now they've deprived the landlords from being able to discuss this with the tenants, working things out. Landlords have to pay mortgages too. They have expenses, and you postponed the agony. So now, what is it, next February or whatever, now these things will start becoming due. and then the tenants, many of them will simply not be able to enforce that. You have tried to reach in, and government is not effective at doing that. Central planning does not work with governments. Libertarians understand that. So these are things that we just need to look at. Libertarians would have allowed, for example, if I have a hardware store, I don't, but say I own a small hardware store. What am I going to do? Well, I'm going to advertise to my customers. Hey, we just have a new filtration system where every 30 minutes we clear out 99% of the particles in the air, whatever. And we're going to take the temperatures of our employees and our customers as they come in, before they come into the store. We'll require them to wear masks. We'll socially distance. I'm a small store, so we'll only allow 10 customers in at a time, whatever that is, and then let my customers decide whether or not they wish to come in here or not, instead of saying who is dispensable and who is not dispensable. It's arbitrary, no matter what. So if they close down my hardware store, what do the customers do? They go to the large box stores. They go to Home Depot, and they buy my hardware there, don't they? Because they are considered to be just indispensable, so they stay open. If you think about it, it's potentially much more dangerous for the customers to go to the large box stores where they'll run into a lot more people than it would be to come to my hardware store. Now, if you're 80 years old and you have pneumonia, you're not going to come to my hardware store, but you're going to make that decision. Maybe other hardware stores will even do it better than I will, so you'll go to them. That's called good. That's called the free enterprise system, which is able to be flexible. Government is not. Government is arbitrary. So if you agree with any of this that we're saying, you're libertarian at your roots. You have to understand that. So this is where we're going. Thomas Jefferson, live and let live. The whole idea, of course, of Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution. We do need government. But if you look at Article 1, Section 8, it delineates what powers Congress will have. And the other powers that are not delineated are reserved for whom? Oh, it's for the states and for the people. But in the meantime, we've had the government, in effect, usurp lots and lots of power to itself. Education, you can look through the Constitution in vain to see anything referencing the ability of the federal government to be involved in education whatsoever. Healthcare, same idea. So we would need to give these powers back. That's kind of what we are talking about with regard to all of this. The government, big government, however, is really, really good and effective at one thing, and that is increasing the size, the cost, the power of big government. And of course, we have seen that over the ages without any exception. So these are things that we need to do. When the free enterprise system is in our roots. When the Mayflower came over here, what, 1520, if I remember my history right, you know, they went into a socialistic system. Everybody will work and labor as hard as they can, but we will provide the crops to people based upon need. So from everyone according to their ability to everyone according to their need. That was the system that they put in the Mayflower when they got here. And with winter, many of them starved to death. So after they picked themselves up and figured that didn't work, they went to the free enterprise system, they went to a system of liberty, and they have thrived thereafter. So I can go on and talk a lot about these things. This is the introduction, and that's kind of what we're doing. But if you look at Thomas Jefferson again, he also said, after the Constitution was passed, that we're going to need a bloody revolution every generation to keep the vested interests at bay, because they tend to accumulate power. Now, fortunately, the Constitution renders this not to be a bloody revolution. We can do that in the ballot box. But how long has it been since we have had a political revolution in our country? You can answer that as well as I can. The late 1850s, when the Republicans took over from the Whigs, and look at all of the vested interests that have come in thereafter. The police unions, the school teachers unions, big government, the two, we call them Republicrats, but the Republican and the Democratic Party are in it for themselves. They are in it for the power. So these are things that we really need to look at. As a practical matter, Thomas Sowell, who's a wonderful man, I'd spell his last name S-O-U-L, but it's S-O-W-E-L-L, he's an economist, and he is quoted, and I recommend that you use quotes of this kind. He's quoted as saying, the first rule of economics is scarcity. There's never enough quality goods and services to meet the demand. But the first rule of politics is to ignore the first rule of economics. Pretty close to right. Remember our example, people are in the mayors and governors are not being held for bad economic decisions, only bad political decisions. So they ignore the economics of it. We also get into Milton Friedman, who was just a hero from my standpoint. By the way, George, thank you. You mentioned my drug policy book. I asked 6 people to endorse my book, and all 6 agreed to do that. One of them was Milton Friedman, just makes me very proud. The other, by the way, was George Shultz, who's the former Secretary of State under Reagan, Walter Cronkite, the CBS broadcaster, Governor Gary Johnson, who I eventually ran with Vice President, and Kurt Schmoke, who I just interviewed on my podcast recently. He was then the mayor of Baltimore, came out against our nation's drug policy as well as Arianna Huffington. But one way or the other, Milton Friedman said something that everybody should listen to. This would cause a practical, positive revolution in our country, a political revolution. And that is, we should judge our programs by the results, not their good intentions. I'm going to say that again. We should judge our programs by their results, not their good intentions. So rent control, you know, even the legislature trying to stop evictions. Okay, well-intended, but the results will be tragic. And the same thing with rent control, which basically just contributes to the problem. The minimum wage results in people losing their jobs. And so these are things that we need to look at. Henry Ford as well gave a libertarian comment. He's not my favorite person socially. I think he was anti-Semitic, but nonetheless, he said, anyone that feels they can thrive by relying on the government should talk to the American Indian. It's really all you have to say. Look what that reliance has done for the Native Americans over, what, 180 something years, not even longer. You know, it's a trap. It doesn't work. And that is a thing that we just need to look at. Finally, Milton Friedman again, who said, if we're waiting for those angels of government to come in and rescue us from whatever the problem is at the time, where have they been so far? Why haven't we seen them yet? And those are things that we need to discuss. That is libertarian thinking. Those are our values. Those are our approaches. You exercise and you go into what works. So I am going to look at some questions. Let's see. But one way or the other, I'm going to decide. I'll make decisions. I can do that. I was a judge for 25 years. I'm going to take what I believe is the best question and announce it at the end of the show, and then let that person who asked that question decide. I will donate one of 2 books to him. Either it's this one, A Voter's Handbook, Effective Solutions to America's Problems, or it will be my 2 paragraphs for liberty, which is here. So I will donate those. If we can get your address where I can send it to you, I will send it by priority mail and to the best question on each of these 5 episodes. So that's going to be kind of fun. Otherwise, what I would like you to do, if you would, I have written something I call One Man's Libertarian White Paper. And it talks about who the winners would be in a libertarian world and who the losers would be. And you can find it at my website. It's judgejimgray.com, pretty easy to find. And you can find it, One Man's Libertarian White Paper. Now, I openly acknowledge that no one person speaks for the Libertarian Party, and I don't purport to speak for the Libertarian Party particularly. I can just give you mine. But at any rate, okay, I see, speaking of quotes, this is from George Reis, actually, but I always love P.J. O'Rourke's, giving money and power to government is like giving whiskey and car keys to teenage boys. George, you're in contention. That wasn't, though, a question, so that'd be put up to. I also believe P.J. O'Rourke said, by the way, George, that if you think healthcare is expensive now, wait till it's free. That is another one that I really pretty much enjoy. But okay, there's from Carrick. What happens when we get a libertarian president in and then it appears to get worse before it gets better and the country decides never again? That's always a risk. That's a practical problem. I think that we should go over the heads of the legislature, for example, and talk about putting in some term limits and that sort of thing. Congress would not want to do that, but I think that this would be a good idea. Let's find out. It's not going to get any worse than what it is now. So that's certainly a good question. But so I've taken up some of our time already. I would like to go through and talk about a few issues, and it will not be the ones that I've mentioned before, but one of them would be immigration. I told you I was running for the nomination for the Libertarian Party for president, and I asked a friend of mine from New York named Larry Sharp to run with me, and he was encouraging me to run, and I finally said, well, Larry, put your money where your mouth is. I will run for president if you'd run with me as my running mate. His response was yes, yes, yes. Very articulate fellow, has a wonderful story. You can find him at the Sharp Way, S-H-A-R-P-E, sharpway.com, and I recommend that you do that. But he had a great idea. He said we should put our immigration system into what he calls 2 Ellis Islands. Now, what does he mean by that? Well, he says that we would put 2 separate locations on the Mexican border away from each other, and 1 private company in each. So they would compete against each other. And people who wanted to immigrate to our country could come to one of those Ellis Islands and could apply. And yes, there'd be a background check for things like criminal justice issues, mental health issues, terrorism issues, whatever. But if they could show that they could work, they're here, they want to work, we'd give them what we'd call an orange card or a visa, a work visa. They would pay a price to come in here, and then once they found a job, then their employer would actually pay a finder's fee, in effect, back to the Ellis Island. So it wouldn't cost the government anything, and we would be able to operate that way. Every 2 years, the person would have to go back to the Ellis Island and show where they were. If they'd gotten on welfare, they would be excluded from the country. They would have to leave, so no welfare would be attached, but other than emergency care and education for their children, but they would be able to work. Then what would happen? There would be other people already here, undocumented or illegally here, if you would, that would say, well, gee, that's working pretty well for you. I think I'm going to go down to Ellis Island as well. And so I would like to be a part of the process. By the way, if you're here legally with that orange card, then you can get a driver's license. You can actually get then car insurance. You can be here legally. And if you have because there's some violent people, some people that are lawless, but right now, they prey upon their other illegal immigrants or undocumented workers, and they can't turn them in. Because if they were to turn them in and blow the whistle on them, well, then they put their own status here at risk. But if they're here legally, then, hey, that's Juan over there. He's causing us all kinds of problems. They can turn him into the police. So they would pretty soon be in competition with the Immigration and Naturalization Service. And I'd much rather go to the Ellis Island and pay a little extra money there and have my employer pay a finder's fee there than actually go through this laborious government issue. So that is something, it's a libertarian approach, free enterprise system, choice, responsibility of all things. That I think would pretty much reduce any problems that we would have with regard to immigration. Another is the homeless issue, and this is just me, but it's Milton Friedman as well. I could be bleeding on the street right at your feet, and you would have no legal obligation to help me whatsoever unless you caused my injuries. That would be different. But we will because we want to, because we're compassionate people. So what about the homeless situation? Now, give me about 2 minutes and I'll come back to this, but I would change our tax system. And a lot of libertarians don't go with me on this. That's fine. We believe in the free flow of ideas. But I would have a graduated flat tax, and I'll come back to homeless in a minute, such that no one in our country would pay any income tax, for example, with these numbers used for illustration. No one would pay any income tax on their first $30,000 of income. And by the way, income, interest income, capital gains, whatever, it would all be there. But then for every dollar you make between $30,000 and $100,000, I would propose that you pay something on the order of 12 cents of each of those dollars to the government. I don't care how you spend your money. No deductions, we'll just do it. If you're fortunate and you earn between $100,000 and $500,000 of those dollars, maybe you'd pay 15 cents of each of those dollars to the government. And if you're Kobe Bryant or Stephen Curry or somebody, and well, less Kobe, but one way or the other, you earn more than $500,000 a year, you'll pay, say, 20 cents of each of those dollars to the government. End of discussion. Now, what if you're here and you earn no money? Well, as long as you're over 18, you're a citizen or you have a green card, police enough. For every dollar you earn between $0 and $30,000, you'd lose 50 cents of your stipend. So you always have an incentive to earn the extra dollar. That is totally missing in the welfare system today, by the way. And today, the welfare system, we could do away with that welfare system except for people with truly special needs. So this is only my idea. I can't say it's in the libertarian platform, but I think it would be a good one. Do away with the other welfare, with all of the intrusion, all of the fraud, all of the bureaucracy, all of that sort of stuff. And just as Milton Friedman said, he called it a negative income tax. The difference between the poor and the non-poor is the poor don't have any money, so give it to them. But what about? People are saying, oh, but they'll buy drugs with it, or they'll go gambling or whatever. But that's a different issue. You know, if they have a drug problem, if they're mentally ill, many of them are, that'd be a local problem and they could address those individually. But now let's come back to the homeless. What about the homeless? Well, I can tell you that if the homeless person were here and automatically had $1,250 in his or her ATM account, the private sector would pretty quickly come up with a fairly inexpensive room and board type facility in which it maybe cost them $1,100, $1,150 a month. They could have the extra $100 to buy toothpaste or toiletries or whatever, and they'd have a place to be. If they had a place to be, then the police could enforce the anti-vagrancy laws and the urinating in public, and we could get control again. But today what we have under our present system, occasionally public officials, political officials feel the heat, and so we're going to spend $10 million and we're going to keep the homeless in motel rooms for 2 months or something like that. We saw that here in Orange County, as you know, with the riverbed. Now they've been, after 2 months has passed, they're back on the street again. But the political powers feel better. But this would be an institutional response to the homeless issue. I think it's libertarian, but one way or the other, that is what I would propose. Let me see how we're doing with some questions. Okay, someone says, this is from Howard, that I probably have the best approach to UBI, that's universal basic income. It's not the same thing, Howard, but you're right to bring it up. Universal basic income means, as I understand it, that the government would give, I don't know, $1,000 a month to everybody, Bill Gates, and regardless of need, which is a colossal boondoggle from my standpoint. And by the way, they'll charge Bill Gates an extra $300,000 in taxes so that he can get his $1,000 per month. So it's not universal income. It's only based upon need, but you're right to bring that up. Should not wearing a mask be a crime like driving impaired, since it puts my health, even my life at risk? You know, that's a difficult issue. If you're outside, I don't wear a mask if I'm out and on the beach or something. But I think that I can probably make some libertarians upset with me with regard to that. But I think that in public, if you're closer than 6 feet to anybody, that I think that we can require that a mask be worn. It certainly is recommended. By the way, and this is a little bit off the subject, but we've all heard the trite saying, tick it or click it, which was really quite successful with regard to having people wear their seatbelts. Now I could say mask it or casket, which is a little bit harsh, but that came to mind. But yes, I think that I certainly am owning my hardware store can keep people from coming in without having if they don't have a mask to preclude them. But these are really difficult. Another one, David Pratt Demarest. Judge, the golden rule is part of virtually every major philosophy. How does the golden rule fit into your view of libertarianism? Is the NAP, I'm not sure what NAP is, so I can't help with that. Is the NAP a derivative of the golden rule? You're right to say that, David, that the golden rule, do as to others as you would have them do unto you. I think it's with regard to all political or all religious philosophies that I know of. By the way, off an aside, I did start, and we have something we call Project Understanding. It's www.project, PRO-JECT understanding, which I think is very libertarian, but it talks about the commonalities among the various world's religions, and the golden rule, honor your father and mother, the rest of that. It's all part of that. I think the golden rule should be there, but it should be voluntary. That's kind of like saying, I agree with this too, socialism is a really good thing. Say that again. Socialism is a really good thing as long as it's voluntary. You know, families are socialistic. Communities could be if they choose to do it voluntarily. It's when the government tries to impose it at basically the point of a gun, it just falls apart. It just simply doesn't work. I wish it would. You know, ask Bolivia how well that's going, or how well it's gone in Cuba. But that's the sort of thing that we're talking about. But at any rate, Michael is asking me, since we need government, even if limited, how do we pay for it if not with taxes? Unfortunately, Michael, I think you're right. You look at Article 1, Section 8, we need a justice system. No, that's not going to be a private justice system. Then only the wealthy get justice. Not a good idea. And a justice system is expensive. And it's not, I'm sorry to say it, I'd love to get rid of the IRS. I'd love to get rid of income taxes. I'd like to get rid of sales tax, all these taxes, but we do need some money for government, and it has to come in through taxes. Taxes are much too high, much too complicated. I'm a modestly intelligent person. I don't understand my own tax forms that I filled out a while ago. I signed them, but I had to go to a tax preparer. Much too complicated. But yes, we do need taxes with regard to that. But Michael, since you're with us, you're not in contention for the best question so far. But at any rate, these are very good questions, and everything that goes with it. With regard to medical services, here again, we'll have a whole hour in a couple of weeks with regard to medical services. But I was raised in the middle 1950s, early 1960s. We had the best medical system in the world. But then the government started getting involved, and the more the government got involved, the worse the thing became. And we'll talk about this rather in depth. But these are definite libertarian issues that we really need to address. Same thing with regard to education. We're going to give an hour to that as well. It is a colossal tragedy if our children do not get a valid, excellent education. The odds of them ever living up to their potential is really reduced, and it really makes a huge difference. I think it's one of the most important issues facing our country today, and we're going to talk about that in one of our later installments. Please join us with regard to that. I talk about drug prohibition. I've already mentioned that with regard to libertarian approaches. Gosh, you know, I wrote a paper one time. I said, you know, who is winning and who is losing? Well, the winners there were 6 of them, 6 winners under drug prohibition today. And one is obviously the drug lords, the people that are selling big time drugs. No one in law enforcement will tell you with any form of conviction that we seize more than 10% of the illegal drugs in our society. And the candid ones really will tell you it's more like 5%. So when he sees a ton of cocaine, for example, that's not a victory. That's just a symbol of the depth of the problem, because for every ton you seize, you're easily failing to seize somewhere between 9 and 15 tons. So the drug dealers, the drug lords are winning. They don't pay taxes on their income either. Number 2 are the juvenile street gangs. Basically the same thing. In fact, they use the sale of illegal drugs as a recruiting tool. Hey, you want to make some money? Come join our gang and you too can have a lot of money. The third group is the police. You know, they're making money because they're getting paid more and more money to fight against the first 2 guys. Now, please, I'm not pointing the finger at the police. They're doing a better job now than they've really ever done before with regard to more arrests, larger seizures, longer prison sentences and the rest, but they're winning, and we're certainly not any better for it. The fourth group are the politicians. Those are the people that get elected and re-elected by talking tough with regard to war on drugs. Not smart, just tough. The fifth group are the private sector people that make money because of increased crime. You don't think about this, but burglar alarm equipment companies, security services, prison guards unions, I mean, they're certainly winning. And the sixth group, this one is a little tough. It's the terrorist groups around the world. You know, Osama bin Laden's group all the way down make most of their money by the sale of illegal drugs. And it grieves me that if the United States government really cared about fighting terrorism, they would do the one thing most important to reduce their funding. That would reduce terrorism better than any other way I can think of. Who is losing? Pretty much everyone else, particularly our children. Why? Because there's a profit motive that has other people try to get them hooked, and then it leads them into drug selling as well. It's not a pretty picture. Bring in a libertarian approach, abolish drug prohibition, hold people accountable for their actions, not what they put into their bodies, and just ask. Ask the next 10 teenagers, don't take my word for it, the next 10 teenagers you find, what is easier for you to get if you want to? alcohol or marijuana, and every last one will say if they wanted to, they'd know where to go to get it. Has anybody been seen selling Jim Beam bourbon on a high school campus? No, but they're selling marijuana and methamphetamines and ecstasy and the rest of that stuff, including fentanyl, which scares the devil out of me. So these are things that we just need to look at. The foreign wars we will talk about as well. It's a huge issue. We have something on the order of 400, this is according to Ron Paul, 400 military reservations in other countries around the world. And any simple audit would tell us that I'm sure within 30 days we could see that we should close at least 3/4 of them. Then we can talk about the other remaining 100. But we'll talk about the foreign wars as well. What is the biggest security threat to the United States of America? Only libertarians are really talking about this. The biggest security threat to the United States of America, in my opinion, is our economy, is the deficit. And my generation's going to be fine. You know, we've had our house paid for. We're doing okay. But it's our children and grandchildren that are going to have to be facing this. And I can tell you that I recently had a grandson. His name is Hudson, born on April 22nd, and he's pretty well known now in libertarian circles because I talked about this on some of these debates, where I told he was born on April 22nd. On April 27th, I held him in my arms for the first time. And I looked down at him and thought, what a miracle child, what a miracle of birth. But then the second thought I had was, Hudson, with the deficit, you're $76,000 in debt, pay up. And of course, that's true, but we're the only ones that speak for Hudson. So this is the where we are there. So this biggest security threat, only the United States is federal government can print money. And boy, I tell you, that deficit is just rebounding. And it's going to be a price to pay by our children and grandchildren. Only the libertarians represent those people, our children and grandchildren, in that regard. So this is where we are. Let me see about some don't feel pressure to answer a student. I'm curious as to why you might think academics always seems to lean Marxist. I don't know the answer to that question. I do believe that the higher institutions of higher learning, the University of California, I went to UCLA, I'm hearing these things as well. They are tearing down, they're calling the free enterprise system in effect the enemy. And it's just simply not true. It just is not true. Milton Friedman says that no people have ever raised themselves up out of poverty except through a system of the free enterprise system as well as private property rights. And that's even true in China, where they have taken, you know, hundreds of millions of people out of poverty. You can almost do anything in China from a free enterprise system. Vietnam also. You can't criticize the government, and yes, the government owns some of the companies, the large corporations, but the free enterprise system works. And in fact, Cuba, they had to go to the free enterprise system. By the way, the Cuban government, basically they spend US dollars there. Same thing in Zimbabwe, because their currency was just inflation, is basically worth nothing. The reason that I think Fidel Castro was able to stay in power for so long is because we had the boycott, and everything that went wrong in Cuba, he could blame on the United States. And in some ways, I guess he was right. But the Soviet Union, when they were still in existence, used to subsidize Cuba. With the fall of the Soviet Union, they had to go to the free enterprise systems because they lost that subsidy. It's the only way that they could stay afloat. So I don't know why our institutions in higher learning, so-called, seem to glorify socialism, but it just doesn't work. It's a trap. Remember Henry Ford's comment. You know, anyone that feels they can thrive by relying on the government should talk to the American Indian. So let me see. Carrie Cannon. Oh, never again. That's in the running for the question of the day, however. Then let's see. Can liberty, this is from Howard, can liberty succeed without a sound philosophical basis like those provided by Ayn Rand or Nathaniel Branden? I think we do have a sound philosophical basis. It's practical, but it's also, I've tried to explain this. Live and let live, that's a philosophical basis. A golden rule, kind of the same thing. So I think that we're not particularly vulnerable to that particular problem. Let's see, and then it gets better or worse. My theory, this is Tarek again, my theory is they are smart people. This is probably back in upper education. My theory is they are smart people who are jealous they don't make more money given their education and smarts. Carrick, the old saying, of course, is if you can, you do, and if you can't, you teach. I don't buy into that. I think teaching is a magnificent profession, but these are things that I think that we need to look in. Carrick, I am going to reach in right now, and if you will give your address and which book would you like, Carrick, I am going to award you either my 2 Paragraphs for Liberty book or my Voter's Handbook, and I will send it to you if, in fact, you can give Michael your address where I can mail that. So that's what I would like to do. Carrick is saying that I'm a professor. Woohoo! I don't know where you're professing, but get busy. We just do not accent enough what works. And again, you go to the minimum wage. I mean, oh, poor baby, you can't earn enough money to sustain yourself, so we're going to raise the minimum wage from $10 to $15. I'm sorry to say it, but as a practical matter, some people are just not worth $15 an hour now. And so what will happen? Go to McDonald's. You can see, you used to order your Big Mac from a person, a cashier. Now you do it by a computer because the amount simply, it costs the institution more money than they're worth. So they're going to have those jobs replaced by computers. You can go back to your Home Depot and you see the self-checkout and that sort of thing. You see it at Costco, you see it. So there's a price to be paid. You can't get up the economic ladder until you get on the first rung, and we're prohibiting them from doing that. It's a major, major problem. So these are things, basically, I feel that private sector simply does it better than government, just does it better. And you listen to my podcasts, they're on the Voice America channel, and I've interviewed people from the Heifer International and from Doctors Without Borders, and so many wonderful organizations that are doing fantastic work, far better than government, to the degree that if you want to have a comparison, think mosquito nets. And what am I talking about? Mosquito, what's he talking about now? And the answer is, it is true, mostly in Africa, there's still malaria, and malaria is a killer. And I think it's shown that for every 10 mosquito nets you get on the ground covering people when they sleep, that you're going to keep at least one person from getting malaria. So it's the same mosquito net, but it costs the government something on the order of $15.50 per mosquito net, and it costs the private sector something like $7 or $8. I mean, it's less than half, same mosquito net. They just do things much more expeditiously. You see SpaceX, a perfect example, where they have been able to recapture, remember, their first booster. Now they have it actually coming back and landing on a barge, saving enormous amounts of money. That SpaceX put people up on the space station recently for 1/10 of the cost that it cost NASA to do. And they had some NASA engineers who were saying, look, you have been able to come with advancements and saving money on things. When I was working for NASA, I suggested the same cost savings, and the response was from the private sector who were dealing with NASA, well, look, we're on a cost plus contract, so we get cost plus 10% for our profit. If we lower the cost, then our profits go down. So they had no incentive to lower costs. That's the way government is. SpaceX, different situation. The private sector works. These are things that we just need to look at. So let me see, from Matt. Do you believe that a better solution to poverty is addressing monetary policy, specifically the value of the dollar, rather than raising the minimum wage? I would allow people to contract with each other. The employer can contract with the individual. Yes, you need to have safety in the workplace. Yes, you need to have child labor laws, things like that. But otherwise, I would address the problem with regard to the minimum wage. You can abolish the minimum wage under the program that Milton Friedman / Judge Gray is suggesting, where you actually have a level, call it a safety net, a level below which you do not allow people to fall. And that's just the simplest question of money. Yes, we need to have the monetary policy be addressed. We talked about that with regard to inflation, but things are all connected. Howard liked my mosquito net example. So I'm getting on a roll here, but I know we're kind of ending up for our hour. Please spread the word. Go to judgejimgray.com and look at One Man's Libertarian White Paper. Put a lot of thought and effort into that. Who are the winners? You were the winner. The people that will take responsibility for their actions, roll up their sleeves, profit from their endeavors, get a good education. The losers will be the teachers that can't teach, the police unions who are supporting police that we have seen that just should no longer be law enforcement officers, that sort of thing. So we bring in responsibility. We reduce the size of government, the cost, the intrusion of government. Still need government, still need that judicial system, certainly need a police force, we need a military, that sort of thing. But you look at Article 1, Section 8, that's pretty much where you go. So please join us as the weeks go along, every Tuesday evening in September at 7 o'clock. And you can, I'm not sure, Michael, you can tell us how they can draw this up on demand, but pass it around and let's talk about these various things. Sarek, if you will give your address and give me your choice, one of those two books, I'd appreciate the opportunity. Let me end with a comment on Southwest Airlines. And this is actually a modestly true story that I was talking with a stewardess who retired thereafter, but she said, sometimes we hit the ground kind of hard. It doesn't happen that often, but hit the runway pretty hard, or 737s. And I would look, she said, look in the first few rows. And if people had their chin on their chest, I would get on the microphone and say, well, I agree that we landed pretty hard here, but I want you to know it's not the crew's fault. And it's not the plane's fault, it's the asphalt. Well, okay, that sounds Southwest to me. You got to have a little fun in this world as well. Tune in, please, next week. Tell your friends, Huntington Beach Libertarian Party, thank you for that. Support the libertarian movement up and down the slate. I think we will give reasoned examples. Be proud of your vote. Vote for someone instead of voting against someone else. You vote, in effect, for the lesser of two evils. The trite statement is you still get evil, but this is what we're doing. And if you want to address me, go to judgejimgray.com, ask any questions, and AMA, I will respond to you because you can contact me through my website. So George, thank you. David, thank you for the opportunity, and stay tuned. We'll do it again, tee it up and hit it again next week. In the meantime then, this is Judge Jim Gray saying, thanks for joining us, and life is good.